Greetings, travelers. Today, we are going to study the blade. Now, you might think that starting this journey is difficult, but you would be wrong. Samurai is incredibly easy to play, but also difficult to master. When looking at the various DPS classes, there are many things to consider. Dancer brings some big buffs, Red Mage brings a raise, but Samurai has the strongest utility of all damage classes. Shinu. Before we begin, we must catch up on what it means to be a master of Bushido. First, you must bring the blade with you everywhere you go. If you haven't kept up on my personal lore, I got married with my katana by my side. This is the minimum amount of devotion required to become a bottom-tier samurai. Next, I recommend going to Dakimakuri to acquire your first inner body pillow, as if you don't have at least one waifu, your motivation to study the blade will rapidly decrease. I'm personally a fan of this one. Now that you've been excommunicated by your family, I'd also invest into Duolingo, make sure to put a point into Mikiri counter, and don't miss buying those firecrackers. Your reward for this dedication is being one of the top DPS in the current metagame, as I am sure most, if not all the top samurai players, have at least one body pillow. The first roadblock to becoming a samurai will start with defeating Sword Saint Ishin. This fight can be pretty tricky, but I do find that hitting him out of this danger attack can trap his AI for phase 1. Oh, wait a minute. The real first steps on our journey take place at level 50 in Olda. There is no prerequisite for which class you need to level first, as long as it isn't a crafter. But since I know that you're all here after watching my Scholar video, we're going to have to work on your mindset as a melee DPS player. Just like all weeaboos, we must survive before we can thrive. While some players will tell you to maintain uptime above all else, I'm here to explain some of the more intricate mechanics of Final Fantasy XIV. It is subtle, but when you are dead, you are unable to deal any damage. Also, when brought back to the mortal plane, you deal decreased damage for a full minute. Now I know what you're thinking, you can still get hit by AoEs and live. It is the healers who need to adjust. However, you will notice that healers need to keep up their own damage, and losing it to heal you is still usually a DPS loss. Although, I'm not exactly sure of how the numbers work here, but I did get an A in my third semester of calculus, so I definitely crunched the numbers. Either way, your number one priority should be to stay alive, and priority number 2 is to take the least amount of damage as possible. Having a good idea of where to stand in advance of mechanics will take you from the worst samurai to the second worst. Priority 3 is to keep that GCD spinning as much as possible. If you have not caught up on what the terms GCD and off GCD mean, then you should look at my previous guide to Scholar. Now that you have your mind in the right place, it's time to look into those click-clackies. But first, let's have a word from our sponsor. Hello, it's me again. I'm sponsoring my own video. If you enjoy what you see, be sure to subscribe. Also, if you want to see some low-quality live streams, you can always check me out on Twitch. I realize that I'm probably going to need to provide some additional incentives to keep people interested. So at 100 subscribers, I will do a face reveal, and at 1,000, I will do an AMA. Thank you for your contribution, and may you feel the sweet embrace of some thick anime thighs. To begin the art of being a DJ samurai, all of our sick riffs start with Hakaze. After clicking this button, you will notice that you have 3 options for what combos with it. I'm sure that your indecisiveness is making you nervous, but fear not, for I have some good advice. Shifu gives you a buff that makes you faster. Getting this buff and maintaining it should be your first step into freestyle samurai. Your follow-up to complete this combo, Kasha, will also give you a bonus for a flank positional. Therefore, it's recommended to get on the side of an enemy first to get that Shifu, and then get the bonus for Kasha. Now, Jinpu will give you a damage buff, making you harder. After finishing your Hakaze combo, make sure to follow up with Jinpu. You now have both of your buffs that you need to keep up for the rest of any instance. Make sure that you wait to blow your hot steamy load until after you have your buffs. Gekko is your follow-up to Jinpu, and will give you a bonus for butt cheek positionals. Now that you know how to make yourself nice and big, and when your positionals matter, it's time to talk about Sen. Kasha, Gekko, and Yukikaze will all grant you a different Sen for completing their combo. Yukikaze does not give you a buff and does not require a positional, unlike its cooler, more intricate brethren, but it still gives you a Sen. When building Sen, much like the United States dollar, the colors don't matter, all we care about are the numbers. The sen that each skill grants you is unique, so you cannot build up 3 sen by only using Gecko. Depending on how many sen you have, your Iai Jutsu will change. For any content where you're only fighting one foe, we only need to focus on Higenbana and Midare Setsugeka. At 1 sen, our Iai Jutsu will give us a damage over time effect. This is the strongest move that you have at your disposal, as long as the damage ticks for close to its max duration. It's wise to keep this damage constantly ticking, so pay attention to that sen when you see the enemy close to no longer having a festering wound. At 3 sen, we gain access to Midare Setsugeka, which allows you, for a brief moment, to create a singularity at the tip of your blade. This is our highest burst damage move, and is primarily what we will use sen for in Kanbei, Tsubame Gaishi. We'll copy our last used Iai Jutsu. Use this immediately after Midare Setsugeka, and do not use this on your dot, as it'll simply reopen the wound and waste this minute-long cooldown. Finally, Mekkyo Shisui will allow your next 3 attacks to break free from the combo requirements. Use this to get sen from Kasha, Gecko, and Yukikaze without having to start a combo constantly. To summarize our main buttons, always start the combo with Hakaze, make sure to get Shifu first and then Jinpu, don't miss out on positionals, don't miss the Chainbreaker, use Copycat on cooldown, and manage your sen gauge depending on how long until your dot falls off. Now that you're comfortable with the basics, it's time to get you through some dungeon content. First, make sure that your multi-target skills are on your hotbar. We use our AoE rotation whenever we fight 3 or more enemies. However, we need to get those buffs up first. Make sure to get a Shifu and Jinpu up before stepping into our AoE rotation. To begin our AoE freestyle, we first use Fuga, which requires you to target an enemy. This will deal damage to the enemy you hit and all enemies in an ice cream cone around it. So try to position our dessert in a way to hit all enemies. Now from here, it's up to you to decide if you want to use Oka or Mangetsu. Oka will extend our Shifu buff, and Mangetsu will extend our Jinpu buff. They also grant us a sen each as well. At 2 sen, we have our AoE Iai Jutsu technique, Tenka Gokan. So use your AoE rotation. Once you have 2 sen, make sure to slap down that cone on an enemy to hit as much of the trash as you can and help save the environment. Mekkyo Shisui can also temporarily alleviate the need to use Fuga to build up the Master Blaster faster. Now that I have explained the core, it's time to ramp up our curry to the next level. Samurai's other resource is Kenki, which can be used on a variety of off GCDs. We build Kenki naturally through our free flow combos and by hitting proper positionals. In addition, slapping Iki Shoten every minute will give an additional 50 Kenki. Ideally, you never generate too much Kenki so that it overflows. So make sure to get that number below 50 before using Iki Shoten. In between our GCDs, we have enough time to weave 2 off GCDs. Our first tool is Hisatsu Kaiten, which buffs our next weapon skill by 50%. Use this right before your Iai Jutsu for maximum flavor. You will generate more Kenki than needed to always buff your Iai Jutsu, so make sure to slap down Hisatsu Shinten in between your other GCDs for even more flavor. The biggest cost will come in the form of Hisatsu Senne. Make sure you have 50 Kenki every 2 minutes to seriously slap some ass. Alternatively, when in our AoE form, still use Hisatsu Kaiten on our Iai Jutsu, but also weave in Hisatsu Kyuten when you start to get too much Kenki, and slap down Hisatsu Guren when you want to slash through your enemies. Just remember, it shares a cooldown with Hisatsu Senne. We also get Shoha, which can be executed after you use Iai Jutsu or Tsubame Gaishi 3 times. Despite Iai Jutsu having a cast time, you can still weave 1 off GCD in between its cast time after level 72. So weaving a Shoha in between Midare Setsugeka and immediately before casting Tsubame Gaishi may be necessary to not overflow your meditation gauge. Don't forget that you have mobility in the form of Hisatsu Yaten as a backflip and Hisatsu Gyoten to dash to an enemy. While you might think that this backflip into an MP combo is useful, this will actually usually result in a DPS loss, as MP will stop your current combo. Generally, we shouldn't have to use our backflip, but it is nice as an option for getting out of a tight spot when you need it, because once again, avoiding death is still your #1 priority. Just know as you get more comfortable not to constantly rely on it. as a true samurai, have little need for gymnastics. Other important skills include Toru Nosu, which will eliminate positional requirements for 15 seconds. This is very useful in high-end content when there are segments where the positions are impossible. There's also Arumzu Renksu, which makes you immune to most knockback effects and can also be used as a tank cooldown when your tank forgets to turn on their tank stance or if you're simply soloing some content. Lastly, I will not forget to mention Sado Ai. If you are able to constantly predict when damage is incoming, the follow-up skills in the form of Hisatsu Seigen will do more damage per Kenki than Husatsu Shinten, and Merciful Eyes can be a decent cooldown if you need to heal yourself. Don't forget to use Bloodbath for some extra sustain, and use Feint when you need to debuff the enemy. And if you're about to be taken to the cinema in a boss fight, slap down Meditation for some free Kenki. Unfortunately, while making this video, I now realize that there's a lot to playing Samurai optimally, and it can take a long time to learn. There are many factors to consider when trying to play well, and getting used to the flow is necessary before you feel like you have a firm grasp on everything. Thankfully, even if your brain is as smooth as mine, you can still deal a ton of damage even while being suboptimal. But I'll give you at least some tips to not completely hit rock bottom. The most annoying things to keep track of are Iki Shoten, Hisatsu Sene, Mekkyo Shisui, and Tsubami Gaishi. Making this easy to see like I did for my idiot mode can really help optimize your cooldown management. For just not trying to overflow Kenki, you can always keep it below 50, as you should always be able to press Iki Shoten immediately before Hisatsu Sene. And listen to that audio cue for when you have 3 stacks for your Shoha. I once again have given you the roux. It is up to you to make the rest of the curry. I recommend shredding an apple in there for a little extra sweetness, and let's get out there and disappoint our families.